Thank you everybody for being here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ash Rust. I'm the managing partner of Sterling Road, a pre-seed B2B fund based in San Francisco, and we invest in companies based in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. Today, we're going to be talking about the basics of enterprise sales. We'll cover 4 main topics: getting feedback, customer profiles, closing sales, and customer success. First of all, some definitions. What is an enterprise sale? Well, first and foremost, it's a product sold to businesses, not individual consumers. Usually when we say enterprise, we mean contracts that are worth at least $10,000 a year. If it's below that, we might be calling it an SMB contract instead. Now, because there's just not that many people who can pay you $10,000 a year, there are less of those customers out there, but we are getting more money per customer. Because there's less of them, there's lots of people competing for their attention, and people that control those kinds of budgets tend to have busy workloads anyway, so it's harder to get their attention. But once you do have those customers deployed, they're much more loyal because they don't want to move to another vendor unless they really have to. In fact, there's a good chance they want to buy more from you if it works out. So let's talk about getting feedback on your initial product from potential customers. My favorite way of getting feedback, the best way, is network introductions. That's when you just know somebody who is a potential customer, or maybe they're a friend of a friend. That is great. Obviously, the personal relationship there will allow you to probably get the meeting at a very high percentage and also get some good feedback on the potential value of your product. Most entrepreneurs do not have this kind of access. So for the vast majority of people that I work with, I would be advising you to do cold outreach, to ask for advice. Other channels that are commonly used that I like less for you at the early stage, number one and the most popular is just straight cold outreach. This is sending thousands of messages on LinkedIn or via email, and a lot of people do that. The problem is that you tend to get a very low response rate, maybe a 1 to 2% rate on social media channels, and maybe 2 to 5% if you're doing it via direct email. So I don't love that channel. Content marketing, obviously that's how most of you found me, so I can't rag on it too much. But the problem with content marketing for early stage startups is that it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort every day, and it takes about 6 weeks before it starts to yield results. Ads. A lot of people use ads, and these are far and away the worst in my opinion. The quality of users that you get from ads tends to be very low, and so we don't know if they're necessarily the right kind of people that you're getting feedback from. Here's a good example of a cold outreach template. So this is where you're asking for advice rather than asking for a sale. And these kinds of emails can get up to a 30% response rate. So first of all, at the very beginning, we're just going to say a very small amount about ourselves. So I'm Ash, I'm the CEO of 𝗥𝘂𝘀𝗁. Then after the initial introduction of myself, that's very short, then I'm going to go right into pluming up their feathers, telling them how wonderful they are and why I want to talk to them. After that, we're going to tell them a little bit about the board, that it's for them, that it's tailored to their specific needs, and also maybe offer a little incentive if we can. Then we want to create a bit of scarcity. So if they are interested, they feel the pressure in this last paragraph that they maybe can't wait too long before they reply to us. And then lastly, we're just going to give them a couple of time options, maybe even a Calendly link, and see whether or not we can get something on the calendar ASAP. So this is the kind of template that we want to use if we are going to do cold outreach in most cases. Customer profiles. So the reason why we invest time in creating a customer profile is because it allows you to target your outreach, and that makes your lead generation much, much more efficient. This is particularly important as you expand the sales team to your first SDRs, and so it's not just your sheer willpower driving the sales team. The first thing we do with a customer profile is we outline 3 or 4 different areas that differentiate the businesses we're going after versus others. Some of the most obvious are business size, what industry they work in, so manufacturing versus defense or maybe tech, the location, if they're in the UK or Canada or somewhere else. Might also be other things, maybe certain software packages that they use. Are they using Oracle or Microsoft Office? And then, of course, you're also selling to individuals. So while it might seem like you're selling to businesses, an individual within that business is going to ultimately make the decision. We're going to have to reach out to them, get them to be a user of our product before we get to a yes. Within a company, we have to usually make a list of potential titles that we might reach out to. So if you're thinking about selling it to the person who runs the sales team, that might be the chief revenue officer, a VP of sales, a head of sales, a director of sales, a sales manager. There's just lots of different options within that. So you make a list of those potential titles. Aim for the people who are going to be the users of your product first, not necessarily the budget decision makers yet. It's easier to convince them after we've got people on their team reliant on your product day to day. And then whether or not you should pursue people like Uber or Google or other famous logos because of their potential brand value, in my opinion, not worth it. Closing sales. A yes is about half the battle. It is not the same as a paid invoice. It is not the same as a deployed contract. It is not the same as a happy customer. When somebody finally says yes, and I know you've done a bunch of work to get somebody to say yes, that does not mean we are done. This sales process is actually broken into two parts, such as the depth. From interview to lead. So if we're going down that line of the cold outreach where we're asking for advice, we begin with the initial contact, asking for advice. We get them interested enough to do a meeting with us. We show them the product, maybe a Figma demo of the product first, get feedback on that, expect to iterate maybe a few times. And if the demo comes to solve their problem, then we want to ask for a small deployment. Hopefully, by the time we get to the end of this process, they're actually asking us to deploy anyway. Customer discovery questions. So when you're in these interviews with customers who are potential customers, but you've asked them for advice, don't start off with a transactional conversation from the very beginning. People do not appreciate that at all. They want the human connection. And it doesn't really take much research from your side to get that going. You know, check where they live. If they happen to be in Austin, your sister lives there. Oh, it's a fun city. My sister lives there. She likes it a lot. Well, how do you like it? Whatever, just small talk, get the conversation warmed up. So when you talk about work, when you talk about wanting something from them, it doesn't seem as nakedly transactional. Very important. Then we've got to ask some real questions about what we need to solve today, which is the problems that they're facing, how much they spend on those problems, how they currently solve their problem. And in particular, it's very important to understand how much these problems cost them, how much they spend solving the problems today, because that's a really good indicator of how much you can get from this potential customer in the future. We always at the enterprise want to sell before we build. Why? Because we don't want to build it twice. And there's a really good chance we're going to get it wrong. So you please start off with the demo tools. Figma is just absolutely everywhere these days. There's really no reason not to be using that. I see people nowadays even using Webflow. So common objections that you're going to face during the sales process. Number one, build versus buy. Are we going to build this internally? Big companies, maybe they have engineers on site, maybe they use a trusted outsourced third party. They're going to have to decide whether or not they want to build something custom for themselves or buy it from you. Whether or not you have all the features that they want. And then cost and risk, whether or not you fit within their budget, whether or not they even trust a startup such as yourself. Those are all hard questions to answer. And so what we're going to do is track these tough questions that we're getting in a Google document or other shared document, Notion, whatever you want. Just make sure that it's editable by everybody. You can put these questions in there along with your model answers and then role play those with other people on your team. So when the questions come up during the sales process, you are ready to knock it right out of the park with the best possible answer. So pricing your first customers. As you remember when we were talking about the customer profile, the first person doesn't need to match any customer profile that we think will work. We just want someone live. So in that case, it doesn't matter if we charge them. They can be free. The second customer should try and match our customer profile, whatever we're working on right now, and we should try and charge them. but we don't want to actually charge them any real money. We want to charge them $1, or maybe you would ask whatever you can get approved without asking anyone else, or with zero effort. Whatever number that is, we just want to go through the process of being a real purchase for an enterprise customer. So we understand the legal, security, IT requirements, many compliance issues that we might encounter. Those are all going to come up, and we want them to come up when budget isn't an issue. All right, sales process part 2. We'll talk about business models, some basic closing tactics, how you navigate the internal stakeholders beyond the people who are the users of the product, and then some basic numbers on what you should expect when you're looking at your own sales funnel. So, business models. Most of the time nowadays, people in startups are selling their product as a service. Closing tactics. So when you're dealing with customers and you can't quite get them over the finish line, you know that they're interested, but they're not necessarily absolutely desperate for the product. How do we get them from that strong maybe to a yes? First of all, we might want to give them the opportunity to complete a small task for them. So we say, hey, is there maybe a data set that we can work on? Is there a small problem that we can solve for you to prove just how good we are? So confident are we that we can make this happen for you? Maybe the customer has an existing provider that they're not happy with, but they're committed to that provider because of a contract for another 3-6 months or something like that. Maybe you can tell them, well, look, move to us right away, sign the contract, but you won't have to start paying us until your other vendor contract expires. And then professional services, what we mentioned about Workday, doing a little bit of customization for people, giving people exactly what they want, maybe doing additional integrations, doing something that's specific to them beyond what your product is currently offering, charging them for that, but because it's exactly what they want, they're much more likely to say yes. Metrics. So what kind of metrics should we be looking for when we are doing our outreach? And these are just the very high level numbers. Most of you will have a sales funnel that's going to have maybe 4 to 6 different levels. Obviously, this is just a 3-step process. So we're looking at things from a very high level. Contract sizes really influence how long it takes to get somebody to a yes. So if it's $100 to $1,000 a year, then we're not going to be able to spend more than a couple of weeks with them in most cases. And then if you're talking about much larger contracts, so 6-figure annual contracts, well, then you might expect that to take 6 to 9 months, maybe even a year or more if you're dealing with government entities. I know some of you on the line are SMB founders, so maybe you're looking at the mid-market or small businesses. Here are some rough guidelines that you should be looking at for your conversion metrics. So last section, customer success. Yes is only half of the battle. You need to ensure customer success for the long term. You have worked your socks off to get this customer found, talking to you, excited about it, to a yes, through all of their other departments. They've deployed, they've paid you one time. We cannot leave it at that. We've put in too much time and effort to leave it at that. We need much more. And that's where customer success comes in. So we'll talk about your first 10 deployments, getting regular customer interviews, measuring engagement, iterating on your onboarding, and then the ultimate goal, which is upselling. For your first 10 deployments with enterprise sales, you've got to be hand-holding these customers at every step. I don't care how good you think your self-serve software might be, it's not nearly good enough at this point. When you're in these regular interviews that ideally we're getting weekly with these early deployments, we need to be asking about whether or not we're actually solving the problem. We need to make sure they're using the product or find out why they're not using the product. And then the core things they want to be changed within the product. Because again, we can't expect our first versions to be perfect. Beyond the interviews, though, we've also got to track what they're actually doing. And that's really important because what they say they're doing and what they actually do might be very different. We also want to use this tracking of behavior to identify power users and lost users. So people who are really using the product all the time, clearly can't live without it, as well as people who were using the product on a regular basis and then at some point stopped. We want to see what the patterns were of their behavior. Were the things that all of those parties tend to repeat? And can we learn from that? In particular, with the power users, we want to use their behavior patterns to understand what our iteration process should look like. The earliest usage of the power users has taken them to this state where they are exactly what we're looking for, the people we want more of. So we need to find out what their actions were in those first 24 hours, first 3 days, first week, etc., and push new users to those actions in the hope that that will create even more power users. And then the ultimate goal is upselling. So when we've got customers happy, when they're in a good place, we've solved their problem, they're getting good outcomes from our product or service, then we want to ask them for internal referrals, right? This is a big organization. It's unlikely that our initial deployment was entirely company-wide. So are there other teams that we can help? When you have multiple competing priorities for upsells, maybe you have ideas that you want to potentially test out, go to those happy customers, offer them trials for free on those products, or perhaps if there's demand for these new products, maybe you can test that by asking again for the upfront cash to see how much people want it. All right, folks. So that is a quick overview of enterprise sales. But this has been really fun from my side. We really appreciate it. Well, with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you, everyone, for being here.